Greetings, dear wanderer, and welcome to this quiet nook of the past. Before we embark on a journey through the frostbitten landscapes of medieval Europe, I extend a heartfelt invitation to you, kind listener. Whether you're curled up in a warm blanket, seeking a moment of calm, or simply craving a tale to soothe your mind, I'm delighted you've joined me. I'd love to hear where you're listening from, perhaps a bustling city or a sleepy village, and what hour of the day wraps you in its embrace. Drop a note if you feel so inclined. It's always a joy to connect with fellow explorers of history. If these gentle, immersive stories resonate with you, consider subscribing to ensure you never miss a chapter. For now, let the cares of today fade as we step into a world where winter's chill was not just a discomfort, but a formidable adversary. A season that tested the very soul of survival. Imagine yourself in the heart of medieval Europe, standing in a rural hamlet where the last autumn leaves have vanished, leaving bare branches clawing at a pale, reluctant sky. The air bites with a sharpness that promises snow, and the fields, once golden with harvest, now lie brittle under a thin layer of frost. Winter looms, not as a mere change of season, but as a harbinger of hardship. For the people of this era, the cold was no fleeting inconvenience. It was a relentless force, seeping into homes, hearts, and hopes. Rivers would soon freeze into mirrors of ice, and snow would bury the land in a silent, suffocating shroud. In an age without modern comforts, insulated walls, electric heaters, or abundant food stores, warmth was a luxury few could afford, and survival demanded every ounce of resilience. Yet, winters were not always so merciless. Long before, the seasons turned with a gentler rhythm, and snowfalls were met with quiet acceptance rather than dread. But something shifted in the heavens, a subtle but profound change that plunged the world into colder, darker times. This was the dawn of the Little Ice Age, a period stretching from the 14th century into the 19th. When temperatures plummeted and winters grew fiercer than memory could recall. Scholars still debate the causes, perhaps shifts in solar activity or volcanic eruptions clouding the skies, but the effects were undeniable. Harvests withered, animals starved, and the wind howled with a cruelty that seemed personal. One chilling tale from this era speaks of the Great Frost of 1709, when Europe froze in a grip so tight that the River Thames in London became a solid path. Merchants set up stalls on the ice, and fires burned atop the frozen river, a bizarre spectacle born of desperation. Yet, even this wonder came at a cost. Many succumbed to the cold, their homes no sanctuary against the frost's relentless invasion. In the midst of such bleakness, there were glimmers of inspiration. Consider young Isaac Newton, then a student at Cambridge, sent home during the Great Frost to his family's rural farm. By the dim light of a crackling hearth, he turned isolation into opportunity, pondering the mysteries of the cosmos. Those quiet, frost-bound days sparked ideas that would later shape his theories on calculus and optics, proving that even winter's darkest hours could birth brilliance. It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to find light in shadow, to transform hardship into hope. For most, however, winter was a trial to endure, not a muse to inspire. The wealthy could shield themselves with heavy cloaks, roaring fires, and stocked pantries, but for the peasantry, the vast majority, life was a daily struggle against the elements. Picture a one-room cottage, its walls patched with mud and straw, where a family huddles around a sputtering fire. The air is thick with smoke, and breath clouds in the chill even indoors. Rising from a straw pallet, you feel the cold numbing your fingers, your toes aching as you pull on threadbare garments. Breakfast, if there is any, might be a thin gruel or a crust of stale bread, the harvest's bounty dwindling with each passing day. Outside, the livestock shiver in their pens, their breath steaming as they chew on sparse, frost-crusted hay. Gathering firewood is a grueling task, your hands raw and bleeding from the cold. But the fire must burn, or the night will claim you. This was the reality for countless souls, a ceaseless battle to outlast the season. Yet, even in such hardship, medieval life pulsed with resilience. The rhythms of nature shaped not just survival, but celebration. Winter was woven with traditions that brought light to the gloom. One such tradition was the Feast of St. Stephen, held on December 26th, a day when the rigid hierarchies of feudal society softened. A peasant might be crowned the lord of misrule, granted brief authority to lead a riotous celebration of feasting, dancing, and laughter. For a fleeting moment, the weight of winter lifted, replaced by the warmth of shared joy. Imagine a village hall, its rafters hung with evergreen boughs, where ale flows freely, and voices rise in psalm. The lord of misrule, perhaps a cheeky farmhand, issues playful decrees, ordering knights to dance or nobles to serve the ale. It was a rare chance to revel, to forget the hunger and cold, and to affirm the bonds that held communities together. These bonds were the true heart of medieval survival. In a snowbound village, neighbors became lifelines. A widow might find a bundle of firewood left at her door, or a family share their last loaf with a starving stranger. Inside cramped homes, families gathered around the hearth, spinning tales of heroes and saints, their voices weaving a tapestry of hope. The firelight flickered on weary faces, but in their eyes burned a quiet determination. They had endured winters before, and they would endure this one, together. These small acts of kindness, a shared meal, a mended roof, a story told in the dark, were the threads that stitched communities through the season's trials. As the weeks dragged on, the snow deepened, and the cold grew sharper. The promise of spring seemed a distant dream. But medieval folk were attuned to the subtlest signs of change, a lengthening of daylight, a softening of the earth. When Plough Monday arrived, the first Monday after Epiphany, it marked a turning point. Ploughs, long idle, were hauled from barns and blessed in vibrant processions, a symbol of life's renewal. The first furrows cut into the thawing soil were a prayer made visible, a pledge that the cycle of growth would begin anew. Villagers gathered, their breath no longer freezing, their faces lit with cautious hope. The worst was over. Spring was stirring. This resilience is humbling. In our world of heated homes and stocked supermarkets, it's hard to fathom the sheer grit required to face a medieval winter. Yet our ancestors did so, year after year, finding joy in the smallest moments, a child's laughter, a neighbor's kindness, a crocus breaking through the frost. Their legacy is one of endurance, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit seeks light. So, when you next feel winter's chill, pause to honor those who came before. Their struggles and triumphs whisper to us across the centuries, urging us to hold fast to hope, to cherish our communities, and to trust in the spring that always follows. As we close this tale, I hope it has warmed your heart, even as it spoke of cold. If these stories of survival and spirit have touched you, please subscribe and share them with others. There are more journeys to take, more histories to uncover. For now, rest well, dream of green fields and gentle breezes, and know that the promise of spring is never far away. Good night. The frost deepened as winter tightened its hold on medieval Europe, transforming the world into a stark, glittering expanse of ice and snow. For those dwelling in castles, the season brought its own challenges. Stone walls, though grand, were no match for the cold that crept through every crack, chilling even the noblest halls. Servants toiled to keep hearths blazing, hauling logs through snowdrifts to feed fires that barely warmed the cavernous rooms. Kitchens worked tirelessly, preserving meats and grains to sustain the household through months when fresh food was a memory. Yet, even these efforts could falter. One tale tells of a noble lady, wrapped in furs, who perished in her own bedchamber, the cold seeping past her defenses as the fire died in the night. Winter spared no one, from peasant to prince. In villages, the struggle was even grimmer. Imagine a family crowded into a single room, the air thick with the stench of smoke and unwashed bodies. The fire, fed with whatever scraps of wood could be scavenged, offered meager warmth. Children clung to their parents, their small frames shivering under thin blankets. Food was rationed carefully, a handful of dried peas, a sliver of salted pork, perhaps a bitter root foraged from the frozen earth. Hunger was a constant companion, gnawing at bellies as the weeks stretched on. Livestock, too, suffered, their ribs stark against matted fur, their breath steaming in barns that offered little shelter from the wind. Yet, amidst this bleakness, medieval communities found ways to endure. The Feast of St. Stephen was a beacon of light, a day when the world turned upside down. A commoner, crowned lord of misrule, led the village in revelry, commanding knights to sing or lords to pour ale. Laughter echoed through snow-dusted streets as mummers performed body plays, their exaggerated gestures drawing roars from the crowd. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted goose and spiced pies, a rare indulgence that filled hearts as much as stomachs. These moments of joy were fleeting but vital, reminding all that life persisted, even in winter's shadow. The church, too, played its part. Monasteries opened their doors to the poor, offering a pallet of straw and a crust of bread to those in need. Monks tended the sick, their prayers mingling with the groans of the afflicted. Charity was a sacred duty, and many nobles followed suit, distributing grain or firewood to their tenants. One story speaks of a lady who sold her jewels to feed her starving village, her compassion a quiet defiance of winter's cruelty. These acts of kindness were not just generosity, they were survival, binding communities against the season's onslaught. As winter dragged on, the cold seemed to seep into the soul. Disease flourished in cramped, smoky homes. Influenza and pneumonia claimed lives with ruthless efficiency, especially among the young and old. A single cough could spell doom for a household, spreading through the stale air. Medieval medicine, rooted in superstition, offered little help. Herbs and bleeding were no match for winter's maladies. Yet, even as death stalked the land, hope endured. Families shared stories of past springs, of fields bursting with grain, and skies alive with birdsong. These tales were a lifeline, a reminder that winter was not eternal. Plough Monday brought the first stirrings of renewal. Villagers gathered to bless their ploughs, their voices raised in song as they paraded through muddy lanes. The earth, softening under the sun's tentative warmth, welcomed the first seeds. Children ran alongside, their laughter a promise of brighter days. The cycle of life turned once more, and with it came a profound gratitude. To have survived winter was no small feat. It was a victory of spirit over circumstance. Reflecting on these lives, we see a resilience that humbles our modern complaints. A delayed train or a chilly morning pales beside the trials of a medieval winter. Yet their legacy lives in us, their courage, their community, their unyielding hope. As you settle into the warmth of your home, spare a thought for those who faced winter with little more than their wits and their will. Their stories remind us that no night is too dark, no cold too bitter, when we hold fast to each other and the promise of spring. As the winter's chill deepened, the medieval world seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a crystalline stillness where every sound, the creak of a frozen branch, the crunch of boots on snow, carried a weight of survival. In villages scattered across the frostbitten countryside, life contracted into a singular focus, enduring the cold, the hunger, and the darkness. For the peasant, each dawn brought a fresh battle, rising from a straw-strewn floor. You might brush frost from your cloak, your fingers stiff and aching as you fumble to coax a spark from damp kindling. The fire, if it caught, offered a fleeting warmth, its smoke curling upward to mingle with the sour tang of unwashed wool and the faint musk of livestock huddled nearby. Food was a precious currency, doled out in meager portions, a spoonful of barley porridge, a rind of cheese, or, if fortune smiled, a scrap of dried fish. The harvest's bounty was a fading memory, and the specter of an empty larder loomed ever closer. In the fields beyond, the land lay silent, locked beneath a blanket of snow that smothered any hope of foraging. The animals, too, bore the season's weight. Cows, their ribs stark beneath patchy hides, chewed listlessly on straw, while chickens, fluffed against the cold, ceased laying eggs. A farmer might trudge through knee-deep drifts to check on his flock, his breath clouding in the air, knowing that a single lost beast could tip his family toward ruin. The cold was a thief, stealing warmth, food, and strength with equal indifference. Yet, it was not just the body that suffered. The soul, too, felt winter's grip. The long nights, unbroken by anything but the howl of wind, could weigh heavy on the heart, stirring fears that spring might never come. The Little Ice Age, which cast its shadow from the 14th century onward, amplified these trials. Rivers that once flowed freely now froze solid, halting trade and isolating villages. In 1431, the Seine in Paris became a glassy highway, with merchants skating goods across its surface, their faces pinched against the biting wind. Crops failed under untimely frosts, and grain stores dwindled faster than expected. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 stands as a grim monument to this era's cruelty. Torrential rains and unseasonable cold rotted seedlings in the fields, leaving granaries empty across northern Europe. In Ypres, a chronicler recorded families boiling nettles and tree bark, their faces gaunt with despair. Some, driven to madness by hunger, turned to unspeakable acts, scavenging what little sustenance they could from the dead. The famine claimed countless lives, with estimates suggesting up to a quarter of some urban populations perished. Yet, even in such darkness, the human spirit flickered, stubborn and unyielding. For those in castles, winter was no less daunting, though cloaked in a veneer of privilege. Stone walls, however grand, were porous to the cold, and tapestries did little to stem the draughts that whistled through arrow slits. Nobles wrapped themselves in furs, ermine, fox, and squirrel, yet still shivered as they paced their halls. The logistics of maintaining a great household were staggering. Servants hauled cartloads of firewood, their hands chapped and bleeding, to feed hearths that burned day and night. Kitchens churned out hearty stews and roasted meats, but even these required careful rationing, as fresh provisions were scarce. One tale from 1420 speaks of a northern English lord who, desperate to warm his hall, ordered his men to burn a cherished oak table, its carved surface reduced to ash for a fleeting hour of heat. His retainers whispered of his folly, but none dared voice their complaints aloud, for winter's bite spared no rank. Disease, too, stalked the highborn as fiercely as the low. Castles, with their bustling retinues of servants, knights, and visitors, were breeding grounds for contagion. A single cough could spread influenza through the crowded halls, felling squires and ladies alike. In 1348, the Black Death swept through Europe, its winter outbreaks particularly deadly in cramped, smoky quarters. In Siena, a monk's diary laments the silence of the streets, where the wails of the dying echo from every house, and the living scarce dare to breathe. The plague's toll was staggering, claiming up to half the continent's population in some regions. Winter's chill exacerbated the suffering, as weakened bodies succumbed to cold and hunger alongside disease. Yet, amidst this devastation, acts of compassion shone. Nuns and monks braved the infected to tend the sick, their prayers a quiet defiance against despair. In villages, survival hinged on community. Neighbors became kin in the face of winter's trials. A farmer might share his last sack of barley with a struggling widow, knowing she had no one else. In return, she might mend his torn cloak, her needlework a small but vital contribution. One story from a 15th century chronicle tells of a village in Bavaria where, during a brutal snowstorm, the men took turns trudging through the drifts to deliver firewood to the elderly. One young man, barely 16, carried a bundle to an old woman named Greta, whose hearth had gone cold. Exhausted and frostbitten, he collapsed at her door, but his act ensured her survival. Such stories were not rare. They were the heartbeat of medieval life, a reminder that kindness could warm where fire could not. The church offered another pillar of strength. Monasteries, often the only refuge for the destitute, opened their gates to the shivering and starving. Monks brewed ale and baked bread, distributing it to those who knocked. In 1392, a Cistercian abbey in Yorkshire recorded feeding over 100 souls daily during a harsh winter. Their stores stretched thin, but never refused. Religious festivals, too, provided solace. The feast of St. Stephen, with its lord of misrule, was a burst of color in the gray. Picture a village square, lit by bonfires, where a plowman, crowned with a makeshift wreath, leads a dance under the stars. Laughter mingles with the crackle of flames as children chase each other through the snow, their cheeks flushed with joy. Minstrels strum lutes, singing of knights and dragons, while villagers share a communal pot of stew, its warmth a fleeting shield against the cold. These moments of revelry were not mere escapes. They were acts of defiance, proof that winter could not extinguish the human spirit. Another tradition, the wassailing of orchards, saw villagers gather to bless apple trees, singing and pouring cider onto the roots to ensure a bountiful harvest. In the West Country of England, one such night in 1450 was described as a riot of song and firelight, where even the frail joined in, their voices trembling but resolute. These rituals tied the people to the land, to each other, and to the promise of renewal. As February's light stretched longer, hope began to stir. The first snowdrops pushed through the frost, delicate yet defiant, signaling winter's retreat. Plow Monday arrived, a day of celebration and labor. Villagers polished their plows, adorning them with ribbons, and paraded through muddy lanes, their songs waking the earth. The first furrow was a sacred act, a covenant with the land that life would return. In one Suffolk village, a farmer named Thomas, withered by years of toil, taught his son to guide the plow, their hands together on the worn handle. The boy's laughter, bright as the strengthening sun, echoed across the fields, a sound that carried the weight of survival. This cycle of endurance and renewal defined a medieval world. Winter tested every soul, from the king in his drafty hall to the child in her tattered shawl. Yet, through famine, frost, and fever, the people held fast. They shared their last crust, sang through chattering teeth, and watched for spring with unyielding faith. Their resilience is a mirror to our own potential, a reminder that even in our darkest seasons, we can find light. So, as you sit by your modern hearth, be it a radiator's hum or a candle's glow, think of those who came before. Their winters were brutal, but their spirits were unbreakable. Let their courage warm you, and may you dream of spring's green embrace. As the medieval winter tightened its icy grip, the world seemed to shrink, hemmed in by snowdrifts and a sky heavy with the promise of more. In hamlets across Europe, life became a delicate dance of survival, each step measured against the cold's unyielding advance. Picture yourself in a small village, its thatched roofs sagging under the weight of snow, the air sharp with the scent of pine and frost. Inside a peasant's hovel, the walls are patched with mud, barely holding back the wind that whistles through gaps. The family within huddles close, their breath mingling in clouds as they share a single tattered blanket. The fire, fed by twigs scavenged from a dwindling pile, sputters weakly, its light casting long shadows on faces etched with worry. A mother stirs a pot of thin pottage, barley, a few withered onions, perhaps a pinch of dried herbs, praying it will stretch to feed her children another day. Hunger is a constant shadow, its presence as palpable as the cold that numbs fingers and toes. Outside, the landscape is a study in stillness, the fields blanketed in white, the trees skeletal against a leaden sky. The animals, too, bear winter's burden. Sheep huddle in their pens, their wool matted with ice, while pigs root listlessly in frozen mud, their snorts steaming in the frigid air. A farmer is cloak-patched and threadbare, trudges through the snow to check his livestock, knowing their survival is tied to his own. A lost cow or a frozen lamb could mean the difference between scraping by and starvation. The task of gathering firewood is no less daunting. Hours spent hacking at frozen branches, hands raw and bleeding, the weight of each log a reminder of the fire's fleeting warmth. Yet, these labors were not just for survival. They were acts of defiance, a refusal to let winter claim victory. The Little Ice Age, which cast its chill from the 14th century onward, made such struggles even grimmer. The cold was not merely a season but a force that reshaped lives. In 1362, a monstrous storm swept across the North Sea, its gales tearing through coastal villages in England and the Low Countries. Known as the Groatman Drink, or Great Drowning, it swallowed entire towns, leaving behind a trail of shattered homes and drowned fields. Chroniclers wrote of waves that roared like the wrath of God, claiming tens of thousands of lives. In the aftermath, survivors scavenged what little remained, their faces haunted by loss. Yet, even in such devastation, communities rallied. In one Dutch village, a fisherman named Peter, having lost his boat to the flood, led his neighbors in rebuilding a communal barn, their shared labor a bulwark against despair. In the halls of the mighty, winter posed its own challenges. Castles, for all their grandeur, were sieves for the cold. Stone walls, damp with condensation, radiated a chill that no tapestry could fully banish. Nobles wrapped themselves in layers of wool and fur, their breath visible even in their great halls. The task of keeping a castle warm was Herculean. Servants hauled endless cartloads of logs, their backs bent under the weight, to feed fireplaces that roared day and night. Kitchens churned out hearty fare, venison stews, spiced breads, and mulled wine. But even these required careful planning, as winter cut off fresh supplies. One tale from 1398 tells of a French countess who, trapped in her castle by a blizzard, rationed her stores so strictly that her household dined on little more than oat porridge for weeks. Her steward, a loyal man named Guillaume, braved the storm to barter with a neighboring manor, returning with a sack of dried apples that brought tears of gratitude to her eyes. Disease was winter's cruelest ally, thriving in the close, smoky confines of homes and castles alike. Influenza swept through villages like a scythe, its fevered grip claiming young and old. Pneumonia, born of damp and cold, filled lungs with fluid, turning coughs into death rattles. In 1413, a particularly harsh winter in Florence saw a plague outbreak decimate the city's poor quarters. A chronicler noted, "The streets are silent save for the cries of the bereaved, and the air reeks of death." Medieval remedies, herbal poultices, bloodletting, or prayers to saints, offered little relief. Yet, amidst this suffering, acts of courage emerged. A nun named Sister Agnes, in a convent near Bruges, tended the sick despite her own frailty, her hands trembling as she spooned broth to fevered lips. Her diary, preserved in the convent's archives, speaks of a light in their eyes, even as death drew near, a testament to the hope that persisted in the darkest hours. Community was the bedrock of survival. In villages, neighbors became lifelines, their generosity a shield against winter's bite. A baker might share his last loaf with a starving family, knowing they had nothing. A carpenter, his fingers numb from cold, might repair a neighbor's leaking roof, his hammer's rhythm a promise of warmth. One story from a 14th-century German chronicle tells of a widow named Elsa, whose only son had perished in a snowstorm. Alone and frail, she faced starvation until her village rallied, each household contributing a small portion, a handful of grain, a turnip, a sliver of bacon, to keep her alive. When spring came, Elsa planted a garden in her son's memory, its blooms a quiet thank you to those who had sustained her. The church, too, was a beacon in the gloom. Monasteries opened their gates to the destitute, offering shelter and sustenance. In 1427, an abbey in the Rhineland recorded feeding over 200 souls during a bitter winter, their monks grinding grain by hand when the mill froze. Religious festivals brought light to the darkness, none more cherished than the feast of St. Stephen on December 26th. This day of misrule turned the world upside down, with a peasant-crowned lord of misrule to lead the revelry. Imagine a village square, aglow with torches, where a young shepherd, his face smudged with soot for luck, commands a knight to dance a jig. Laughter erupts as the knight complies, his armor clanking comically. Mummers perform body skits, their voices carrying over the snow, while tables groan with roast goose, minced pies, and wassail bowls brimming with spiced cider. For one night, the lines of class blur, and all are united in joy. These festivities were more than merriment. They were a defiance of winter's cruelty, a declaration that life would endure. Another tradition, Candlemas on February 2nd, saw churches aglow with candles, their light a symbol of hope's return. Villagers brought tapers to be blessed, believing they held power against storms and sickness. In one Yorkshire parish, a priest named Father Edmund led a Candlemas procession through a blizzard, his flock clutching their flickering lights as they sang hymns against the wind. The chronicler who recorded the event wrote, "Their voices rose like a fire, warming the frozen night." Such moments stitched communities together, their shared faith a thread stronger than the cold. As winter waned, the first signs of spring stirred hearts. Snowdrops and crocuses, fragile yet fierce, pierced the frost, their colors a promise of renewal. Plow Monday, the first Monday after Epiphany, marked the land's awakening. Plows, polished and garlanded, were paraded through villages, their blades gleaming with purpose. In one Norfolk hamlet, a farmer named John, his hands calloused from years of toil, led his ox team to the fields, his daughter skipping alongside. As the plow cut the first furrow, the crowd cheered, their voices a hymn to survival. The earth, softened by the sun, welcomed seeds, each one a prayer for abundance. This cycle of endurance and rebirth defined the medieval spirit. Winter was a crucible, forging resilience in the face of hunger, cold, and loss. Yet through it all, people found light, in shared meals, in songs by the fire, in the promise of spring. Their legacy humbles us, reminding us of our own capacity to endure. As you sit in your warm home, perhaps sipping tea or glancing at the frost on your window, think of those who faced winter with little more than courage and community. Their stories are a fire that still burns, warming us across the centuries. Let their strength inspire you, and may you dream of fields green with hope. As winter's icy breath swept across the medieval world, the land seemed to pause, locked in a silent struggle between life and death. Villages huddled beneath blankets of snow, their thatched roofs glistening with frost, while the air carried a sharp, clean bite that stung the lungs. In these hamlets, survival was a daily act of defiance against a season that offered no mercy. Step into a peasant's home, its walls a patchwork of wattle and daub, barely holding back the wind's relentless howl. Inside, a family clusters around a meager fire, its flames flickering against the gloom. The air is thick with the acrid scent of smoke, mingling with the earthy tang of straw and the faint musk of livestock sheltered in a corner. A mother, her hands roughened by cold, stirs a pot of pottage, a thin gruel of oats and foraged roots, while her children, wrapped in a single ragged blanket, watch with hollow eyes. The meal is small, barely enough to quiet the hunger that gnaws at their bellies, but it is all they have until the next dawn. The fields outside lie barren, their furrows hidden beneath a crust of ice. The sun, low and weak, offers little warmth, its rays swallowed by a sky heavy with gray clouds. Farmers tread carefully through the snow, their boots sinking into drifts as they check on their animals. Sheep, their wool clumped with ice, huddle in makeshift pens, while oxen, ribs stark beneath shaggy hides, chew sparse hay with slow, deliberate bites. Losing a single beast could spell ruin, for livestock were not just labor but food, clothing, and currency. The task of gathering firewood was equally critical. Men and women, their fingers numb and chapped, hacked at frozen branches in nearby woods, each log a precious lifeline. The cold was a relentless foe, seeping into bones and sapping strength. Yet every chore, feeding the fire, mending a leaking roof, or milking a shivering cow, was a small victory, a refusal to surrender to winter's grasp. The Little Ice Age, which cast its shadow from the 14th century into the 19th, intensified these struggles. Temperatures plummeted, and winters grew longer and fiercer, reshaping the rhythms of life. In 1540, the river Danube froze so solid that merchants in Vienna drove carts across its surface, their wares bundled against the wind. But the ice was no blessing. It halted trade, stranded travelers, and left villages cut off from supplies. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, triggered by unseasonable cold and relentless rains, was a stark reminder of nature's power. Crops rotted in sodden fields, and granaries stood empty from England to Flanders. In Bruges, a chronicler wrote of mothers weeping as they boiled grass for their children, their faces pale as death. Some, driven to desperation, turned to eating leather or worse, their humanity fraying under hunger's weight. Estimates suggest up to 15% of Europe's population perished, their bodies buried in frozen ground or left unclaimed in snowbound streets. Yet, even in such darkness, the human spirit found ways to endure. In one Norfolk village, during the famine's worst year, a farmer named Edric shared his last sack of rye with his neighbors, knowing it might cost his own family. His wife, Elfjafu, wove baskets from dried reeds to trade for a handful of dried fish, her fingers bleeding from the work. Their act of generosity sparked others. A widow offered her only hand, a blacksmith his spare tools, until the village clung to life through shared sacrifice. These stories, though small, were the threads that wove communities together, binding them against winter's cruelty. In the castles of the highborn, winter was no less daunting, though wrapped in a veneer of privilege. Stone walls, cold as the grave, radiated a damp chill that defied even the grandest fireplaces. Nobles draped themselves in furs, wolf, bear, and marten, yet still shivered as drafts snaked through tapestried halls. The logistics of maintaining a great household were staggering. Servants, their hands cracked from cold, hauled logs through snowdrifts to feed hearths that burned without pause. Kitchens labored to preserve dwindling stocks, turning withered vegetables into soups thickened with barley or beans. In 1370, a Scottish laird, trapped by a blizzard in his keep, ordered his men to slaughter a prized boar to feed his retinue. Its meat roasted over a fire that briefly warmed their spirits. His steward, a wiry man named Duncan, later recalled, "The scent of roasting flesh was a prayer answered, though we knew leaner days lay ahead." Disease was winter's silent partner, thriving in the cramped, smoky spaces where people sought warmth. Influenza and pneumonia spread like wildfire, their symptoms worsened by malnutrition and cold. In 1422, a brutal winter in Paris saw hospitals overflow with the sick, their coughs echoing through stone cloisters. A physician named Maitre Jean, trained in the humoral theories of the day, prescribed hot broths and bleeding, but his remedies often did more harm than good. The Black Death, which ravaged Europe in 1348 to 1349, was particularly deadly in winter, as weakened bodies huddled together, spreading the plague's miasma. In York, a monk named Brother Thomas wrote, "The snow falls ceaselessly, and with it death. Families vanish overnight, their homes silent as tombs." Yet, amidst this despair, acts of compassion shone. A young apothecary in Siena, named Lucia, braved the plague to deliver herbs to the afflicted, her courage a beacon in the dark. The church was a pillar of strength, its doors open to the desperate. Monasteries, often the only refuge for the poor, offered shelter and sustenance. In 1401, a Benedictine abbey in Saxony recorded serving porridge to over 300 souls during a bitter January, their monks toiling by candlelight to grind frozen grain. Nuns, too, played their part, tending the sick with quiet resolve. Sister Beatrice, in a convent near Rouen, spent her nights sewing blankets from scraps, her fingers pricked raw, but her heart steadfast. "God's warmth is in the giving," she wrote in a letter to her abbess, a sentiment that echoed through the ages. Festivals brought light to the gloom, none more cherished than the feast of St. Stephen on December 26th. This day of misrule turned the world topsy-turvy, as a peasant was crowned Lord of Misrule, granted brief dominion over knights and lords. Picture a village green, lit by bonfires, where a plowman named What, his cap adorned with holly, orders a stern bailiff to sing a bawdy tune. The crowd roars with laughter as the bailiff complies, his voice cracking with embarrassment. Mummers weave through the throng, their faces painted, performing skits of saints and dragons, while children chase each other through the snow, their shrieks mingling with the crackle of flames. Tables groan with roasted capons, spiced pies, and bowls of wassail, its warm cider laced with cinnamon and cloves. For one night, hunger and cold recede, replaced by the warmth of community. Other traditions, too, sustained the spirit. On Candlemas, February 2nd, churches glowed with blessed candles, their light a symbol of hope's return. In a Welsh village, a priest named Father Owain led his flock through a snowstorm, their tapers flickering against the wind. "The light holds," he said, his voice steady, "as does our faith." Wassailing, another cherished rite, saw villagers gather in orchards to sing to apple trees, pouring cider onto their roots to ensure a fruitful harvest. In 1445, a Somerset chronicler described such a night. The fires blazed, and voices rose in song, as if to wake the trees from winter's sleep. These rituals were not mere superstition. They were acts of faith, tying the people to the land and to each other. Winter's toll was not only physical but emotional. The long nights, unbroken by anything but the wind's mournful howl, could weigh heavy on the soul. In 1387, a chronicler in Cologne wrote of a melancholy that seeps into the heart, as if the sun has forgotten us. Yet, medieval folk found solace in storytelling. By the hearth, family spun tales of heroes like Roland or saints like Nicholas, their voices weaving a shield against despair. In one Lincolnshire village, an old woman named Edith, her eyes clouded with age, recounted the legend of the Wild Hunt, a spectral host riding the winter winds to wide-eyed children. "Fear not the storm," she said, "for it carries the brave to glory." Her stories, passed down through generations, were a reminder that even the darkest nights held magic. As February dawned, the first signs of spring stirred hope. Snowdrops bloomed, their delicate petals piercing the frost, while the days stretched longer, their lights softer but stronger. Plough Monday, the first Monday after Epiphany, marked the land's rebirth. Ploughs, polished and decked with ribbons, were paraded through muddy lanes, their blades gleaming with promise. In a Devon village, a farmer named Roger led his oxen to the fields, his son at his side, their hands together on the plough. The first furrow, cut into the thawing earth, was a prayer made visible, a vow that life would endure. Villagers gathered, their voices raised in song, their faces alight with cautious joy. The worst was over. Spring was near. This resilience defined the medieval spirit. Winter was a crucible, testing body and soul, yet through it all, people clung to hope. They shared their last crust, sang through chattering teeth, and watched for spring with unyielding faith. Their legacy is a mirror to our own potential, a reminder that even in our darkest seasons, we can find light. As you sit by your modern hearth, perhaps warming your hands on a mug, think of those who faced winter with little more than courage and community. Their stories are a fire that warms us still, a testament to the unbreakable human spirit. The long night's work. Winter's demands were relentless, shaping every facet of medieval life. For the peasant, each day was a litany of tasks, each one a battle against the cold. Mornings began in darkness, the family rising from straw pallets to cokes of fire from damp wood. The mother, perhaps named Alina, would sweep the hearth, her breath clouding as she arranged kindling with care. Her husband, Godric, trudged to the barn, his boots crunching through snow to feed the livestock. The cow, its milk thin from poor fodder, lowed mournfully, while chickens huddled in their coop, too cold to lay. Feeding the animals was a delicate balance. Too much hay, and the stores would run dry. Too little, and the beasts would weaken. Godric's hands, rough from years of toil, trembled as he broke ice from the trough, his thoughts on the spring that seemed a lifetime away. Foraging was another necessity, though the frozen land offered little. Women and children scoured the woods for hardy herbs, nettles, sorrel, or wild garlic, their fingers stinging as they plucked frozen leaves. In 1394, a chronicler in Kent described a group of girls, led by a lass named Cecily, who braved a blizzard to gather pine needles for a medicinal tea. Their small haul saved a neighbor's child from fever, a quiet triumph in a season of loss. Repairing homes was equally vital. Roofs, patched with straw, often leaked, letting in snow that melted into icy puddles. Men climbed rickety ladders to stuff gaps with mud and moss, their hands numb but their resolve firm. In one Yorkshire village, a carpenter named Baldwin spent a week mending his neighbor's hovel, his hammer's rhythm a steady beat against the wind's howl. Women, too, bore a heavy burden. Spinning and weaving filled the long nights, as threadbare cloaks and blankets needed constant repair. In a 15th-century French chronicle, a weaver named Margot was praised for her skill, her loom producing cloth that warmed her village through a bitter winter. Her fingers, calloused from the shuttle, wove not just wool but hope, each thread a promise of survival. Cooking, too, was an art of ingenuity. With fresh food scarce, women turned dried peas, beans, and salted fish into stews, flavored with whatever herbs could be found. A recipe from a 14th century English manor describes a pottage of barley, leeks, and a single precious egg, its warmth a lifeline for a hungry family. Children, though spared the heaviest labors, were not idle. They gathered twigs, fed the fire, or tended younger siblings, their small hands busy despite the cold. In a 1420 chronicle from Bavaria, a boy named Hans, no more than 10, was lauded for carrying water from a frozen stream, his bucket heavy, but his heart light with pride. These tasks, though grueling, were woven into the fabric of community. Neighbors shared tools, traded skills, and watched over each other's children, their interdependence a shield against winter's isolation. The scourge of winter's maladies, disease was winter's cruelest weapon, thriving in the close quarters, where people sought warmth. The air in hovels and castles alike was thick with smoke, and the stench of unwashed bodies, a perfect breeding ground for contagion. Influenza swept through villages, its fevered grip sparing no one. Pneumonia, born of damp and cold, turned coughs into death sentences, especially for the young and old. In 1377, a brutal winter in London saw thousands succumb to a great cough, their lungs rattled by the damp air. A chronicler wrote, "The churches are filled with mourners, their prayers drowned by hacking breaths." Medieval medicine offered little solace. Physicians, steeped in the theory of humors, prescribed bleeding or poultices of mustard and rue, often worsening the patient's plight. In 1410, a Parisian doctor named Gillis treated a noblewoman with a fever, only to see her die after a regimen of leeches and bitter tonics. Folk remedies, though sometimes kinder, were no more effective. Herbal teas might soothe a sore throat, but they could not halt pneumonia's advance. The Black Death, which struck in 1348, was particularly devastating in winter, as malnourished bodies huddled together, spreading the plague's deadly breath. In Florence, a merchant named Giovanni recorded, "The snow falls, and with it our neighbors. Entire streets lie empty, their doors sealed by fear." Yet, amidst this suffering, acts of courage emerged. In a 1349 convent near Avignon, a nun named Sister Claire risked her life to nurse plague victims, her hand steady as she cleaned sores and whispered prayers. Her chronicle, preserved in the convent's library, speaks of a duty to God and man, to hold fast even as death surrounds us. Monks, too, played their part, turning monasteries into makeshift hospitals. In 1403, a Cistercian monk named Brother Anselm in Cologne spent weeks tending the sick, his robes stained with their suffering. "Each life saved is a candle lit," he wrote, his words a testament to the resilience that burned even in winter's darkest hours. The elderly and children were especially vulnerable. Infants, born into the cold, faced grim odds. Some estimates suggest a third did not survive their first winter. Mothers, weakened by hunger, struggled to nurse, their milk thin and fleeting. In 1360, a chronicle from Norwich tells of a mother named Agnes, who wrapped her newborn in her own cloak, sacrificing her warmth to keep the child alive. Both survived, a miracle celebrated in the village's church. The elderly, their bones aching from years of toil, often succumbed to the cold, their bodies found stiff by morning. Yet, communities rallied to protect them. In a 15th century German village, a group of youths took turns bringing firewood to an old man named Otto, his gratitude a warmth that rivaled the flames. The light of festivals. Festivals were winter's antidote, moments of joy that pierced the gloom. The Feast of St. Stephen, celebrated on December 26th, was a crown jewel of the season, a day when the rigid feudal order dissolved in laughter and revelry. A peasant, perhaps a cheeky lad named Tom, might be crowned lord of Misrule, his mock scepter waving as he ordered knights to juggle or ladies to dance. In a 1425 chronicle from Devon, a lord of Misrule named will led a procession through the snow, his command sparking peals of laughter as a dour reeve was made to sing a love ballad. Mummers, their faces painted with charcoal, performed skits of saints and devils, their antics drawing cheers from bundled crowds. Tables groaned with roasted meats, spiced cakes, and wassail bowls, their steam rising like a prayer. Candlemas, on February 2nd, brought another burst of light. Churches glowed with tapers, each one blessed to ward off evil. In a 1430 Yorkshire village, a priest named Father Simon led his flock in a candlelit procession, their voices singing psalms as snow fell softly around them. "The light endures," he said, his words a beacon for weary hearts. Wassailing, too, was a cherished rite. Villagers gathered in orchards, their breath clouding as they sang to apple trees, pouring cider onto frozen roots. In 1460, a Somerset chronicler described a wassail night where the fires blazed, and the songs woke the stars, as if spring herself were listening. These celebrations were more than merriment, they were acts of defiance, proof that winter could not extinguish joy. In one Cheshire village, a 14th-century mumming play saw a blacksmith play St. George, his hammer wielded as a sword to slay a straw dragon, to the delight of children. Such moments stitched communities together, their laughter a thread stronger than the cold. The stirring of spring. As winter waned, the first signs of spring were a miracle to behold. Snowdrops and crocuses, delicate yet fierce, pushed through the frost, their colors a promise of life. The days grew longer, their light softer but stronger, warming faces that had forgotten the sun's touch. Plough Monday, the first Monday after Epiphany, marked the land's rebirth. Ploughs, polished and garlanded, were paraded through villages, their blades gleaming with hope. In a 1415 Norfolk hamlet, a farmer named Henry led his oxen to the fields, his daughter Alice scattering seeds at his side. The first furrow, cut into the thawing earth, was a vow that life would endure. Villagers gathered, their songs rising like larks, their faces alight with joy. The return of spring was more than a season, it was a triumph. Families emerged from their hovels, leaner and wearier but alive. Children ran through muddy lanes, their laughter a hymn to survival. In one Kent village, a grandmother named Etheldreda, her hands gnarled from years of toil, taught her grandchildren to plant peas, her voice soft with memory. "This is how we live," she said, "through winter's dark to spring's light." The earth, softened by the sun, welcomed their seeds, each one a prayer for abundance. This cycle of endurance and renewal defined the medieval spirit. Winter tested every soul, from the king in his drafty hall to the child in her tattered shawl. Yet through famine, frost, and fever, they held fast. Their legacy humbles us, reminding us of our own capacity to endure. As you sit by your modern hearth, think of those who faced winter with little more than courage and community. Their stories are fire that warms us still, a testament to the unbreakable human spirit. May you dream of fields green with hope, and may spring always find you.